And the audio's all good? We're all good to go, all that? Yep. All right. We were just talking about it. We're going to go right back into it, which is, listen, down to brass tacks, kickoff. It's happening. Are you sweating about the group that you're in, Rob?
You know, when we first were given the brackets, and this is the one thing that was funny about what the conversation that took place online, the teams were given the brackets a good week before they were announced. So I know there was this whole urban legend that someone had cracked the code of the brackets by reviewing scrim results. Come on. You couldn't have.
How does that even add up? Wait, by reviewing scrim?
That was like, but that's what somebody came out and said, oh, we've seen who's scrimming who and who's not scrimming who. And based on that,
oh my God,
we figured out the brackets. It's like, shut up. No, you haven't. Someone gave you these brackets. But when we first saw it, it was like, how are we so great at random draw? Last year in the lock-in tournament, which was random draw, we drew Fnatic out of the box in a single elimination tournament with a squad that really wouldn't have competed together.
With 30 teams.
We draw Fnatic, right? Then we go to the Africa TV event, right? And our manager, TenZ, he actually attended that and watched the random draw. And he comes back and he's like, oh, we drew Paper X in the first round. I'm like, Paper X? And he goes, yeah, I watched the whole thing. He said he was the only one there. I'm like, you are bad luck. So then we get the next random draw, which I don't know that most people really process, that only the 1 seeds in each region are placed based upon their performance at champions, right? And it's like, okay, like that's a reasonable thing to say, right? That Fnatic, PaperX, EDG, and EG are all getting 1 seeds based upon the most successful team in their region and champions. And then everybody else is a random draw and put into a pool. So we get our pool, and somehow, not are we in a pool, now use your own power rankings. You have Sentinels, Loud, and Leviathan.
It's so funny because I genuinely don't remember where I ranked these. You could be lying to me and I'll just have to run with it. I really don't remember.
You had Sentinels, Leviathan, Loud as 2, 3, 4 in your power rankings in the Plat Chat power rankings.
Oh, right.
Maybe not your personal ones.
It's all coming back to me.
Okay.
Yes, it's all coming back to me.
We're all in the same pool together. Right? It's like, how good are we at random draw that we can draw 2 of the 3 best teams outside of ourselves? So now, weirdly, there is a silver lining to it. That night, I was just like, this is insane. But there was a silver lining when I woke up the next morning and started reading all of the detail of it all. You do have a protection by having the best teams in your group, because if you're the second place team, when you get to the semifinals, which is now single elimination for all the marbles, that game you can't play a team that was in your group.
Yeah.
Right? So therefore, we can't be playing Loud or Leviathan in that semifinal single elimination match. So in a weird way, I guess you'd rather have the best teams when you're playing double elimination. But yes, would you rather have 3 teams in your and just know you're in the semifinals? Yes. But barring that, it is. But yeah, there's no question starting with a Sentinels Loud matchup is it is going to be an exciting match, certainly for the fans.
Yeah, it is a good fan match. It's a good viewership match. Do you think it's going to be a good match for your team?
Well, here's the funny thing, right? Because I've watched a lot of what took place in the offseason. I'm not sure why there's all this controversy about what took place in that 4th quarter of the year. And so...
What controversy about what?
People not really understanding how to comprehend when Riot's not actually structuring it, overseeing it, right? And they call it the offseason. So people didn't really know how to get their head around what do these tournaments mean, right?
Okay.
And it's like, here's what I know. Everybody was trying to win, right? So you've seen a number of teams in a number of different events, and Loud I haven't seen at all, right? Like Leviathan went and smashed through the Superdome, and 100 Thieves had a rough debut, but Boostio had been on their team for a week, something I can relate to from
it's basically, you guys have the same
something I can relate to from last year with the exact same dynamic is your team really hadn't been together, you go to a tournament, the Terra Ludwig Invitational, they went 0-2. You have to assume now with another 5-6 weeks of practice, they'll be in a totally different place. But in terms of our own team and how we walk into this season versus last season, right? It's like we probably didn't really think through all the complications of trying to bring in 2 Brazilian players in the first year of partnership where everybody's moving and you're dealing with visas and where do you have to be. And so we didn't get our team together basically until New Year's, right? Well, this year, it was funny because Eric Ma and Charlie Lipsy, who are the 2 key people in terms of our competitive side, we had lunch with all the players just to kind of do an end of season wrap up and just kind of talk about what went right, what went wrong. And when I asked everybody, and this was right after LCQ, and I asked everybody, what is your plan? Are you going on vacation? Are you going to take a break? And they're all like, no, this was horrible. Like, we want to get going. And so at that point, we're like, okay, Champions is going to be in LA, right? Like, what better scrim partners will there be ever? And so it's like at that point, it was like, okay, we need to bring in a new IGL. And we need somebody who really connects with his teammates. So we did trials during Champions. So we're playing the teams at Champions. So there's no better way to really get a sense of, okay, how does this team stack up against the best teams in the world at their peak? And, again, people are always trying to figure out how to get their head around scrim results. But it's more about seeing the communication, seeing the way the players connect and how their talents connect, right? And what we quickly saw was John's style completely connected with the other players in the team, right? Because John is super aggressive, right? John can frag, right? Which for a lot of IGLs, right? That isn't normally what they're best at. But John, it was like, oh, so John has that mindset of, oh, I could take this duel because I would win it. So let's go because you can win it. And so you quickly saw, oh, okay, this group of people plays really well together. And so that's how we then went into, like I said, what's called the off season with that sense of, okay, this is a team that can play together, connects with each other. So we had a spectacular period run there. And so we head into the start this year, exactly the opposite of last year, right? The teams played 11 matches together as we head into the kickoff tournament versus last year where they'd played 3. And they played all 3 of them within 6 weeks as opposed to over the course of 3 months. So you're learning together. And so, yeah, we definitely come into the season in a totally different place. Now, does that mean we're going to beat Loud? Of course it does. Because we're Sentinels. We expect to win every match.
I mean, to be fair, I think if you're taking the safe bet, which, listen, respectfully, for a long time, Sentinels have not felt like the safe bet, but the team does feel like that in this group based on, I mean, what you were saying in just how much evidence there actually is that the team is performing very well together in this off season. So when you're stacking that up against Loud, who lost their best player, we haven't seen them. It's just a big question mark. Lev, obviously they looked incredible too. And then they made that last second change recently, switching out Nosler for Calm. So there's a lot of uncertainty in a group where Sentinels are the known quantity of being good, which is like comparing to 2023 is listen, there hasn't been more hope for the hardcore fans of your team in a long time. But when you were talking about, you were having the meeting at the end of the 2023 season and figuring out what everyone's plans were. At that point, I mean, you stuck with the majority of the team. The initial 1-for-1 was just bringing in John. Was that a conscious decision right away of just, okay, we need an IGL. That's the one switch we're going to make, and we're going to take it from there?
Yeah, I think we generally felt like right? We were just always playing catch up in 23, right? We just started much later than everybody else, right? We then draw Fnatic, so we only play one match in the lock-in tournament. And so, right, you're just playing less. We started by playing less. We competed less, right? So that entire season was playing catch up, right? And then Marv jumps in, and then Def decides to step away. And Marv's like, because we don't have anyone who's an experienced IGL, Marv, to his credit, is like, all right, let me give it a try, right? And he comes in with a great energy, and he definitely is this really talented player who could frag. And so sometimes you can just win, right, by just outskilling your opponents, right? It's not about strat sometimes. Sometimes it's just, if I make every shot, I will win. But Marv, we'd only signed as a substitute for that season. And he had wanted to take a break, but certainly had a connection to Chad and the old Optic guys. So there was a sense that he was going to want to return to them and join up with NRG. And so, you know, he and I, again, sat down before the end of the season, before he went back to Toronto. And I could tell that was definitely, you know, his number one goal was to go back and play with that group again. And so it was like, okay, we now have the time. Let's find an IGL that can gel with this core group, because from a skill level, right, we've seen TenZ at his best, right? I think he still holds like the best stat line of all time from Reykjavik, right? Zekken at times played like the best duelist in the world, but again, when things aren't working out around you. Saucy's was a world champion less than 12 months before that. Pankata was a world champion less than 12 months before that. And we had, until the scrims at Champs, we'd never seen Pankata playing smokes for us, right? And it was like, oh, wait, that's the guy we signed. So it was like, okay, we need somebody who could come in and gel with this group. And like I said, John instantly did. So we got John signed really quickly. Like, we weren't messing around. We weren't like, oh, what are all our other options? Like, no, this works. So let's get this in place and let's get started, right? So we had our roster together, right, before anyone else, right? Because everybody else made roster changes in the off season.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, you locked in TenZ, re-signed really quickly.
Yeah, we re-signed
as well, right?
TenZ and brought in John.
Yeah.
And those were the two key moves we made initially. And then the last move we made, which now has created a whole another layer of complexity, right, was bringing back Zelsis. I'll call everybody by their gamer name just to make it simpler. Bringing Zelsis back, who had a brief run with us, but we loved his attitude, right? There's nobody who brings more passion to the game. No one who's more like, do you need me to do something for the sponsors? Do you need me to shoot content? Like, tell me what you need me to do. And he was fully committed to being the sixth man and being like, I'm going to be here. I'm going to show up. I'm going to move in like our offices. The players all live in apartments that are probably like 200 yards from our office. He moved into that building. He was there on time for every practice. So he was there going through everything with the team. And so now the first problem was Pankata got stuck in Brazil for a while getting his visa renewed. So then Zelsis was playing with the team. And then we started the offseason by smashing Moy Shopify in the first map of our show match. And then everything went wrong on the next two maps and we lost. And then when we were getting ready for the next show match, then Pankata was sick. We do have a problem with illness in our franchise for some reason. Pankata was sick, so Zelsis steps right in, and we were losing to G2 2-10 on map 1. And so this was a G2 hosted event, but they didn't have casters, but they also didn't, like, they had Shaz hosting, but they didn't have him hosting like, hey, there are no casters, you really need to host. So we were streaming it on our YouTube channel, and my content guys are like, you have to go in there. Like, everyone is roasting us that there's no casters. So I show up when it's like 2-2 or 2-4. And I'm like, hey, I'll answer any legitimate questions. Just post them in the chat and I'll answer. And at first people were like, wait, is that actually Rob Moore in the chat with us? So I'm answering the questions as we're getting destroyed. And we had just lost to Moy Shopify on our opening show match. So people are just like, what is wrong with you people? Are you ever going to win again? And then out of nowhere, and this was a big part of why we did bring Zellsis in, is that optimism of like, we're down 2-10 at the switch, whatever. We're now on the favored side of this map. And we then run it back and win 13-11, right? We haven't lost since. We haven't lost a match since that moment. So for me, that was like the key moment in this roster coming together, is when suddenly it was like, here we go again. We'd lost away Shopify in the first show match. We're down 10-2 to G2. We had never beaten that group as Sentinels. We had never beat those 4 guys who used to be on the guard. Not one time. And here we were again, and it was like, okay. And we rolled them, and then won map 2. And like I said, we haven't lost a match since. So when it gets into this whole conversation about Zellsis versus Pancata, right, you're also looking at how do these 5 players work together? And how do they gel together? And so you can have a situation where on paper you're saying this is the player with more raw skill, but this is the player who these guys are playing at their best when they're playing together, right? So it is like sometimes where you have an agent, right, that is OP, but you're better off at a different agent, so therefore you're better off playing the agent you're great on. And that is a little bit where we're at right now with Zellsis and Pancata, is this team just clicked and just was playing at a different level. Now, one of my favorite moments of the attitude of like, we're here to win, was we put out the Uncensored, where we have the behind the scenes comms from tournaments. And there's a pistol round where John is going for an ace and Zellsis pops the guy. Right? And everybody's like, wait, Zellsis just snaked his ace, right? And then when you listen to the comms, Zellsis is like, did you want to get his favorite color too, or do we want to win this match? Right? And so it was that kind of dynamic of, no, we're not here to pad stats. We're not here. We are here because we have a group of people who we do think, when they're playing at their best, could actually again compete for a world championship. And that's what our goal has been, despite all of the like issues we've gone through along the way. But that's what we've always been attempting to put together in terms of a roster, is a roster that on paper you look at and you go, okay, that's a group of really talented players. So this is the first time where we feel like we have that combination of really talented players who are all connected again for the first time since summer of 21, where we had that same sense.
Gotcha. Yeah, because signing John, that's the first time since, I guess, outside of Ken Pecky, is really the only other player that you've signed that doesn't have a big brand when actually joining up with the team, which is a rarity yes. for the Sentinels organization. But it certainly proved its value. I mean, I would assume if things keep going as they are going, and once the actual season kicks off and the viewership is there, that will change for him individually. And then after that, yeah, you re-signed TenZ immediately. I mean, some people would call that into question, point to shortcomings that he had in the previous season or lack of flexibility. How much in a decision like that do you weigh up the brand power of TenZ versus what he's offering in the server? Because his offering in 2023 was certainly questioned.
Well, I think, again, because TenZ has been part of our org since, like I said, spring, summer of 21. And we've seen TenZ at his best. And when he's at his best, he's as good as anybody, right? But there's no question TenZ really feeds off the team chemistry. And when things are going well and people are playing well together, that's when he's at his best. And we saw it in the Africa event where people are just going, what is going on here? TenZ is suddenly playing Omen in a way that few people have played it. And you're like, oh, there he is again, because he does have a level of creativity in his game that when he's at his best, suddenly you're like, he can do things that other people will never think about doing, right? So yes, there is always that combination, and you mentioned it in terms of we're always bringing in players with star power. Yes, in the signings we've made, right, we brought in Zelsis, who had a reasonable profile before he came and joined us for the LCQ. We brought in Shroud in an infamous moment to join us for the LCQ. And we brought in Marv as our sub, right? Who's one of the biggest personalities in the game.
Yeah.
But certainly relative to Zelsis and Marv, right? They were people who you also couldn't question their skill level, right? Shroud, the only issue was he just hadn't made a commitment to the game. But certainly in terms of where he'd been as a professional in Counter-Strike, and he certainly had played a ton of Valorant, to say, okay, if he's really going to apply himself, then this could be an interesting experiment. And we have no idea how it's going to play out. But he was like, I'm ready to go to boot camp and I'm going to put the work in. So John was the first person where it was absolutely saying, okay, we need to go get just the IGL that's going to help us play the best. And the fact is, actually, the year before, that was the same thought with Def, although that was much more about the coach and the IGL who had that connection. And so Syyko just believing in Def as the person. So again, Def certainly didn't have any more really of a profile than John has. But the big difference is this year, we actually got to trial people, right? Last year, you were signing people who'd never met each other, right? You were putting a team together of people who never had met each other, played with each other, other than saying, oh, Saucy and Pancata had played together, Zakin and Def had played together. Here, it's like, okay, you have this core group of 4 who played together now for a year, and now you're saying, okay, what IGL does this group connect with the best? And like I said, you saw instantly with John of, oh, it's taken less than a day for this team to suddenly be playing at an A level, like I said, we're scrimming against Paper X and DRX and Evil Geniuses and EDG. We're playing against the best teams and Fnatic. And suddenly it was not only were we holding our own and it became urban legend, that it wasn't we were holding our own. We were actually just steamrolling these teams. So it was like, okay, they may be trying out things in their scrims, so this may not be a perfect comp, but at the same time, you're like, okay, we can see what this group could do together.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, and like I said, you immediately saw with TenZ again playing with John that same level of creativity and commitment. And you're like, oh, yes, he has this amazing mechanical skill, but he also has a real passion for the game when he's in the right environment. And so that's what we definitely we're connecting back to. And then on the other side of it, there's no question as a brand, and we can talk about this either now or later on, about right? At the end of the day, this is a business, right? And we're all trying to figure out how do we make this work as a business, right? So you need some fan favorites to be part of your team, or your team has to win everything. Well, that's a complicated goal to say, oh, we're just going to win everything every time. So it definitely says we're going to really take that opportunity to see if we can get this to work. But we saw instantly when John stepped in that it was like, okay, he's now back to 2021 TenZ, and it's fun to watch.
Yeah. Okay. There's several things I definitely want to circle back to from within there. But first, early when you were responding to that, you were talking about TenZ, and in terms of the struggling with not gelling and that being the catalyst for the 2023 problems. And talking about that roster in 2023, at the beginning, lock in, you had the draw against Fnatic, the best team in the game's history, probably. Then I don't even think that's debatable, really. But
Well, I could debate it, but
okay,
I'll let
well,
you.
sure, yeah. I mean, I guess there's
2021,
a few choices.
2021 Sentinels won like 6 tournaments in a row. We
Yeah,
won
there'd be
Masters
a lot of NA
1.
teams.
We won Masters 1. We won Masters 2, beating Fnatic twice.
Wait, Masters 2? Which?
Well, yeah, because everyone forgets what Riot did because it was COVID.
Yeah.
They created a Masters event in each region. There were 4 Masters. So they created a major.
Oh, right.
They
Yeah,
created
yeah.
a major tournament. We won the major tournament at the beginning
I
of the
see
year.
what you're saying.
We went to Iceland and won the major tournament.
Debatable, but all right, we're not getting hung up on this one. Debatable.
Either way.
I'll leave it at
Like
that.
I said, you sound undebatable. I said, I will debate you. I will debate you.
Debatable, but when we're talking about 2023 and going into that year, teams totally reset. Starting off the Ludwig Tarek event, the team had just come together. Pancata had just gotten there, barely spoke any English as far as I know from the outside. And then so that tournament, you get 1 win, 2 losses. Sure, you head to lock in. Fnatic first round. That's tough luck. You're out. All right, now it's time for the actual bulk of the year. We're in VCT Americas. There's some time between lock-in, and then we're going to see week after week, how is this team going to progress? So we go into the season, 100 Thieves first match, if I remember correctly. It was like a 2-1 win. I remember TenZ in second.
overtime.
They were going crazy. Yeah, so that was first win of the season. It's like, all right, these guys have gotten some time. 100 Thieves had a pretty good showing at lock-in, so that's a solid start. And then from there were 2 losses. You played against NRG and Lev, also both top-tier opponents. I mean, for the most part, you're playing against all top-tier competition early in 2023. And it was after that Leviathan game that later that evening, I think you had posted yourself the announcement that the head coach at the time, Don Syyko, was getting removed. The assistant coach Kaplan was going to be promoted. From the outside, that seemed very reactionary as to what was going on because the quality of the opponents you were playing was so good. It was like, is this necessary this early on? So what were the hours after that match like? What was going on then?
So I think the real key was just not being on the same page of how to make up for the handicap we had, right? Because we weren't even scrimming when other teams were playing in the Red Bull Home Grounds event, right? So we, for a whole variety of factors, right, we couldn't practice. Or there was a decision that said you can't practice with 2 players in Brazil, right? Well, now somehow this year we did practice with a player in Brazil. But, right, like Saucy was in Brazil, like after the Africa tournament, he went to Brazil to get his visa renewed, and it took a few weeks. So he scrimmed from Brazil for 2 weeks. So it's possible. It's not ideal, but it is possible. And as you're working through communication and trying to get together, right? The prior year, the decision was made not by the org. I think the one thing I have to comment on, because this is the meme about Sentinels, right? As if somehow our ambition isn't that our players don't practice more and don't compete more. That isn't like we're like, no, don't bother practicing. It's not important. So when people always meme on saying, wow, Sentinels is actually grinding, how unlike them. And it's like, what, you think that's our ambition? So somehow we rolled straight from 22, where that started as the meme, to it kept going in 23. Sentinels aren't practicing, Sentinels aren't getting ready. So when we drew Fnatic, that we had a whole conversation to say, okay, that's just a horrible draw, right? There's like a 5% chance we're going to win this match. Their core team has been together for a long time. Our core team hasn't been together at all, right? We're likely to be at this event for 1 match. What can we now do to make up for it, right? And we suggested staying in Brazil and doing a boot camp similar to what we did this year with Champs, right? Of saying, okay, you know what? 2 of our players are Brazilian. We'll we'll finance a boot camp. Riot basically, right, when you lose a tournament, Riot basically gives you a certain amount of time, but basically you don't get to keep the hotel rooms and whatever. And we're like, hey, why don't we stay in Brazil and let's boot camp and let's now try and make the best of it. And there was a sense that that wasn't a good idea. And so that was something that we disagreed about in terms of saying, hey, we're in this bizarre situation. It's nobody's fault we're in this situation, but we're in it.
So when you say we, you're talking about yourself and management? Or
I'm saying the team and the org are in this bizarre situation where first, we couldn't practice because of visa issues. And second, we drew Fnatic.
Yeah.
Right. So we're likely to have to play one match. And now we're going to be back to, by the time we get to April 1st, right, we'll have played what was actually 3.5 matches because one of the matches in Terek Ledwig was a 1-map match. Right. So it's like, okay, how do we make up for 3 months of not playing? Drawing Fnatic, so it's not like we're going to play 2 or 3 matches. We're likely to play 1 match, and we're only going to likely play 2 maps, right? So it was like, okay, here's an idea that we, the org, have to address it, right? There was a decision made that that wasn't a good idea, right? So then we get into VCT, and we haven't done anything to try and make up the ground we need to make up. Like, we need to be putting in more work now than other people to make up for the fact that we're now 6 months in and we will have practiced the least and competed the least to pretty much any team in the world by, like I said, by no one's fault. But now it was like, okay, here's something we could do to get it done. So that didn't happen. And so you get to the regular season and we're like, okay, we like gutted it out and stole that match from 100 Thieves. We were 2 seconds away from losing the match in overtime where we suddenly stole the round from 100 Thieves. So, but again, when you say you're playing the best teams in the world, right? Well, those are the players we are signing that we acquired, right? Like, we went out and acquired Saucy, Pencata, and Zekin, right? All 3 of those players we acquired. We have a roster and a payroll that's at the top tier in the league with resumes that would say to you, we should be one of those teams. So when you say to me, well, wait, you're losing to Fnatic, Leviathan, and NRG, but we're not losing to them, right? We're getting steamrolled by them, right? Like, if you go back and look at the line scores of those, right, they weren't competitive matches. So it's like, we've built a team to be one of the best teams in the world. We've gone out and acquired the best players that were identified as the best players by the coaching staff. We've made a big commitment to this roster. So when we're getting rolled by the best teams in the world, well, wait, we're supposed to be one of the best teams in the world, right? So when you got to week 3, that as we're having this conversation, and the casters are talking about us. I can't remember who was casting that day, or maybe it was the analyst desk. Maybe it was you. That saying,
it's possible, actually.
And
I think
saying about us,
and
saying about us. Well, Sentinels don't have an identity, right? And it's like, well, we were formed 6 months ago, right? That yes, there were obstacles, but we didn't figure out a way to deal with the obstacles, and it wasn't from lack of support. Right? Like, we're like, we'll pay for hotel rooms, have the players stay in Brazil. But that was a decision that was decided not to pursue for a variety of reasons. But we didn't figure out how to make up that gap. So now here we sit and we're not competing with the top teams, right? Because as the season proved out, right, 100 Thieves, along with us, were a bottom middle tier team. Right? That's who we beat. So when you look at it in hindsight, you also can't say to me, well, wait, look who you beat. It's like, no, if you look at the...
Right. But you have to put it in the context.
Yes. No, I understand why
of
fans from the outside...
Yeah.
Because the one thing that we've tried to do, right, is, for better or worse, Sentinels Twitter is entertainment. Right? That's what we do. Right? We love to have fun with it. We love to meme on people. we're happy to give and we're happy to get back, right? That is what Sentinels Twitter does. It is there to entertain fans, right? But when it comes to heavy lifting or bad news, for better or worse, that's the role that I've had to play because we want our Twitter account to be entertaining. So that's why, yes, it does come from my Twitter when we were announcing that we've decided not to keep Syyko. But like I said, that was just, again, you get into fit, right? Which is, Def was a great IGL for XZ. He didn't end up being a great IGL for this group of people, right? Why ever that happens, right? He's now like back having fun, coaching Counter-Strike, now playing Counter-Strike and like doing well again. So it is about just how groups of people connect to each other. And so we never found that rhythm as an organization with Syyko. And so it was like, okay, we have two choices now, right? Do we think anything will be different? And how are we going to put in the work to make this up? So that was when the decision was made to say, okay, we're going to go in a different direction here. And this season is probably lost. So let's now be building and getting ready for 24.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I think the main critique that would just be levied at that is that, which was essentially the critique that lasted throughout the season, as the roster carousel spun and spun, is that things felt very reactionary from the outside. A bad result would come in, someone's gone. A bad result would come in, someone has to change their role, like things along those lines. So I guess to sum it up, ask the question of that critique in hindsight, or in the context of that and in the context of hindsight, was that too quick of a decision to make, or do you think it was appropriate at the time and still do?
So here's the problem, right? Because you put us / me in an awkward position, because what we've tried to do, right, is be publicly neutral to the decision, right? We're not airing our laundry. We're not trying to badmouth people and say, these are all the things that happened that we didn't like along the way. So this is why we're making the change, right? So I take a hit publicly because I've made a decision that I'm not looking to torture somebody and roast them publicly to defend my action.
Oh no, I totally understand. That's not my intention. My intention is more to speak on the how this season played out, just in the context of the team overall. Not to specifically draw out like what did Syyko do wrong. I'm more curious of how you feel the decisions impacted the team's success.
Right, but I'm saying those are also connected to each other, right? Because I didn't say when we decided to part ways with Syyko, right, to say these are the 5 reasons why we've decided to make this change, right? I didn't want to do that publicly to somebody as we're letting them go. Def and Syyko were very connected, right? So for him, and he never felt comfortable with Sentinels, right? Like, again, that dynamic that you just have to embrace of our fans expect a lot. We made a big investment. We promised them things were going to be different than 22.
Yeah.
And they looked exactly like 22 again. And so there's a lot of pressure that comes with that, right? And the constant, like, which I got beat up about, is like, why did you guys sign Def? Why didn't you keep Shaz? Right? So he would get beat up with that, right? So that change was a decision Def made because Syyko left and the fan pressure and where the team was at. He just wasn't having fun playing the game again, right? So the one that got misunderstood was Def being replaced, because Def made that decision, not us, right? We absolutely made the decision that we weren't making the progress we felt we should be making, right? Because we didn't look any better or different by the time we got to April as we did at the Tarek Ludwig Invitational. It was still, we won because our players sometimes just don't miss a shot and you win. But that isn't the way you're going to be a top tier team. So we weren't making the progress we wanted to make, which is why we replaced the coach. Def decided he didn't like the fact that Syyko had been replaced and he wasn't having fun playing the game. So he decided to step away. So we didn't make the second decision, but there's no question the decision we made about the coach is what affected Def. So that's what then started the chain reaction of personnel moves. But if you go back and look at our history, we're not the people, like we stuck with that 2021 roster, right? Through most
through thick and thin.
Yeah, through thick and thin.
Ups and downs, all that.
Exactly. So that the player roster move triggered off of the coach move. But, and like I said, relative to what our ambition is, right? And we saw it last year, that the key to playing great Valorant is your players have a sense of what their teammates are doing, right? And what their teammates are capable of, especially when you're in the IGL and you know that you can give your player a call that he can execute. And so a lot of that comes with repetition and competition. And it is totally different playing on a stage in front of hundreds of thousands of people watching you versus you're in a scrim and there's 12 people who know you made a mistake. So that's the key, is our intention wasn't that. But like I said, what we've tried to do as an org is when something goes wrong, that we're not trying to defend our actions publicly. So at the end of the day, I take that hit and I'm okay with that. Like I said, I'm sharing this with you that I've never shared publicly about what happened and why we replaced Syyko. But that's the trade-off, right? Is where that, yes, I take a hit by not defending why I did something and explaining it to people. But that's where I feel like, well, okay, I'm willing to take that hit. Now, here, for better or worse, because Syyko and Def now are in a good place, so I don't feel like I'm affecting their career, right? But if I go out and say, oh, these are the 10 complaints I had, that will affect his ability to get another job. Now, he got another job, he's doing well, so now I feel a little bit like, okay, let me explain what happened. So
yeah, no, I totally understand. And I mean, also this, I mean, at this point, it does seem, though, that any of the, I mean, for the most part, the issues that were visual from the outside, certainly, as to what was going on in 2023 and all that, were a focus on what is being rectified for 2024, without a doubt. All the practice time, all the off-season events, some of which, I mean, you guys were even putting on yourselves, which is, I'm surprised that there was not as much really effort or emphasis from a lot of the other teams generally in the world to do the same. I understand the philosophy for some, perhaps, that it's in their best interest to just hide things and come into the season, you know, as a question mark. But also from, I mean, we can kind of get into the business standpoint as well when you briefly, you know, mention that with TenZ, but it also helps the organization. It helps the numbers. You're getting content. You know, you're allowing your content creators to stream the event with your players in it, watching your team, all of that. Yeah, I mean, we were talking about it a little bit before we just went live, but talking about the scheduling for this year, how that's playing out. People are quite, at least some people are vocally very frustrated with the lack of the perceived lack of matches or real lack of matches, I suppose, however you're looking at it, and then having this drawn out off season. But it seems like you got, I mean, more than the other teams, you guys made the most of this past off season.
Yeah, I think there's a handful of teams who approached it the way we did. And I understand some teams, right? Because here's the funny thing about how many matches people play, right? If you have a down year like we had, right? We lost the first match in lock-in, we didn't make playoffs, and we won one match in LCQ, right? So we were playing near the minimum amount of games you could end up playing in a season, right? So last year, right, we played 13 matches plus the Tarek Ludwig. That was our regular season, but even Tarek Ludwig's not regular season. And the thing I think that was hard for people to get their head around, because Riot created for Valorant a unique system, right? Where League of Legends is very much the entire year is kind of programmed by Riot, and therefore there's no real window of time for teams to do something. Where in Valorant, Riot gave the teams and third-party tournament operators the ability to create events in the fourth quarter of the year. And so the funny thing is, you were part of the inspiration because you all were having a whole conversation about the lack of third-party tournaments of any note. And then you were trolling, which I didn't realize.
It was okay. To be fair, well, you could go on. I don't want to interrupt.
Go ahead.
No. It wasn't a troll. I did end up being correct. There was, because I had said on the show while I was in Champions, at one of the after parties. Listen, might have had one too many. Was hanging out with some of the people from Cloud9, and I think it was MC mentioned about. It was maybe it wasn't. I can't listen. One too many. Someone mentioned that there was a tournament in somewhere in Asia with 4 teams, and it did end up happening because it was one with like C9, DRX, maybe EDG. I can't. It was a 4-team tournament, and the details extremely hazy. So I was offering nothing of value bringing this up on the Plat Chat podcast whatsoever.
So I was watching the Plat Chat podcast where you were all talking about third-party tournaments during the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, maybe I'll find some nugget, because we were absolutely saying, great, we now have our team in place. Everybody's in LA working their butts off. What are we going to do? And I then sent you a message going, wait, what are you referencing? And then you're kind of like, yeah, there isn't anything. So we went back to Riot and said, hey, what is happening in North America that's for tier 1 teams? And they're like, there's a couple things, but not a lot. I said, okay, well, could we organize some show matches? They're like, yeah, you just need to give us dates. So we came back into the office and I walked around with Kaplan and Drew. And I'm like, okay, we have a thought. What if we host them right here in our office? And they're not technically LANs, but you're sitting next to each other on the same server. So it might as well be a LAN. So, but what if we get Starforge to give us some more computers and Zowie give us some more monitors, and let's set up a space here and let's host some show matches in our office. And we kind of walked around and came up with a thought. And I was like, do we need to put up a partition? They're like, no, they'll be fine. And I'm like, okay, because people are going to be walking through here. It's like, yeah, it's not a problem. So we came up with that idea. And then around the same time, Ludwig reaches out to me and goes, hey, would you guys be interested in doing a show match? And I'm like, you know what? Not only would be interested in a show match, I was thinking about maybe putting a tournament together as well. Would you be interested in both? He's like, of course. So then G2 comes into the space through what all happened with the guard. And so I know their CEO talked to him several times. So he immediately reaches out to me and goes, hey, what do you guys plan on doing? And I'm like, okay, obviously G2 doesn't have a plan. They just got a team. So suddenly it was like, okay, we have us, G2, and Moist Shopify. So we'll do a show match with each and host them in a tournament. So we'll do the show matches, then we'll have a tournament. So now we're trying to find a 4th team. And we're reaching out to everyone. And we're home getting our visas. We don't have a roster. We couldn't compete, right? Like we kept waiting for NRG. Like, do you guys have a roster? They're like, no. So Cloud9 was going to be out of the country, right? So we kept trying to find. And then finally we're like, okay, I went back to Kaplan. I said, well, who are your best scrim partners? Like, which of the challengers team? And he's like, Oxygen is, or we reached out to M80, who at the same time I think was figuring out their final roster. So he's like, Oxygen. So we reached out to dapr and said, hey, you want to come back and try and teach us a lesson? And so and it was like the week before the tournament, and they had another tournament they were going to be going to that weekend. And they're like, okay, we got to figure out the logistics. I'm like, we'll move the playoffs up on Friday so you guys can fly to San Francisco Friday night. And so But that's how we picked Oxygen, as being the best team in North America with a roster, because they had won a smaller tournament, but we saw them win that. We'd been scrimming with them. So like, okay, they're definitely going to be one of the top tier challengers teams. So suddenly it was like, okay, there's 6 matches. Then there was a tournament going to be put together in Korea. Fortunately, one of our general manager for the team, he's Korean, so he reached out to the Africa people, and suddenly it was like, oh yeah, there's a spot. So then it was like they were saying, okay, here are the teams we're looking at getting, and we're like, okay, if they're actually going to have PaperX, DRX, Liquid, and EDG, that's amazing. Like, that is as good of a tournament. Those are the 3 best teams in Asia, right? Like, looking at China and the Asia Pacific region, it's like, okay, these are the 3 best teams from last year. That'll be awesome competition for us. So now it was suddenly like, okay, we're going to do a warm up with these show matches, have a little tournament that we're going to host, and then we're going to go to Korea for this big tournament. So suddenly when you look back at what did we do, right? Some of it was saying, oh, Riot's giving us the ability to host a tournament. And so this will get into part of the conversation about economics, right? Which is, oh, we now showed we could put on a professional tournament that, certainly from a viewership standpoint, it wasn't like people looked at it and said, huh, what are they doing? Are they like streaming off of their iPhone from their office? And then Starforge, who's been a great partner, and Zowie, they're both like, were able to move quickly because we put all this together 3-4 weeks before we hosted it. And so we were able to put that whole thing together. And now it was like, oh, okay. We had the combination of starting to create an asset that hopefully we can now do again this year. But also now we've created a way for our team to get really good competition. Because I think the one thing there's a little bit lost on the community is that Riot selected the organizations they thought would be the best marketing partners. They're never looking at who are the 5 players on your roster today, because as we've seen, the 5 people on your roster today are not going to be the same 5 people on your roster 2 years from now, right? So there's an incredibly deep talent pool in North America. So the fact that there are only 5, now 6 North American teams in the VCT, there are a whole lot more than 30 A-level players. So the competition you're getting last year from the Garden M80, and now this year we've seen with Oxygen and Moist Shopify as well, like, those players are all players that are good enough that they could be playing in the VCT. Now, some of the players are too young, like on Oxygen, where they have 2 players that couldn't be in the VCT currently. But that's also part of why they're on Oxygen and why you can't look at Oxygen and say, well, come on, they're a tier 2 team. And it's like, well, they have the ability to have these kids play who are superstars, but they aren't eligible for the VCT. So when the Tarek Ludwig tournament was happening, I should have posted my pick'em, because I was like, there's no doubt in my mind that Moist Shopify and Oxygen are going to win this tournament, because the 2 of them have been grinding like we have. Like, they came to our event, but they also played in a whole bunch of other tournaments. And 100 Thieves was going to have a new IGL who'd been there a week. I'm like, I've lived this. I'm like, this is going to be Oxygen and Moist Shopify, because the skill gap between those top tier 2 teams and the tier 1 teams is minimal. So if you're at the top of your game and someone else is just getting their squad together, so that's why that was no surprise to me relative to them. And it certainly, you saw it in terms of our performance. It wasn't like we steamrolled them in our tournament and then went to Asia. And it was much more, it was as competitive as the matches we played in Korea.
What's your take on the system that Riot has decided to implement this year, in which the franchise team can partner up with one of the challengers team and have that symbiotic, like, funnel relationship with players if they need to move someone up?
Yeah, I'm going to say of all of the ideas Riot's had that I'm a big fan of, this one seems complicated, right? Because now you're theoretically limiting yourself, and how are you working out a transfer of those players? So we ultimately have decided not to pursue that, but that's just a decision that we've made.
Gotcha. How overall right now, because as far as I know, to take it back a little bit, in your early beginnings of esports, which was around like 2016 or so, you were initially involved with the Overwatch League, with the Gladiators, correct? And so from one franchise league to the next, what are Riot doing that has, gotten you to sign on to another franchised effort in esports after what we've seen from Owl, going down the drain? What are they doing right?
It's interesting. Let's talk about Owl for a second.
I would love to talk about. I'm happy to talk about Owl. I'd love to hear your perspective on the early days of you getting involved in that to the collapse. I think that would be great.
So season 1 of the Overwatch League was as good as it could have been, right? Like, they had the playoffs were on ESPN and ABC and Twitch, right? Like, Activision Blizzard really did a great job of putting that league together, convincing ownership groups and media partners of saying, hey, we're building a esports league that's going to look different than other leagues. And year 1 was a great success. And they did everything they needed to do. They did a great job marketing it. The problem became, and this is always the challenge in esports, of Overwatch started peaking and declining in popularity as a game, and then Overwatch 2 was getting delayed, right? So you now were just kind of losing your fan base, and therefore, if you don't have something to keep your fans engaged in the underlying game, right, they become less and less interested. And then in the death blow, because we were in it for the first 2 years, right, where they were with Twitch. Or it was the second year on YouTube.
I think it was the first 2 years.
First year on Twitch.
I believe you're correct, yeah.
So then, for better or worse, it got moved to YouTube in like the dark of night, like the day before the season starts, right? With no big marketing push. Like, again, the marketing they put on for season 1 and the kickoff of that league was amazing. So year 1 was as big a success you could possibly have. So then you had 2 factors coming at you at the same time and they sold partnerships for year 2 at a crazy amount, right? Like, they were selling expansion teams after season 1 went from 20 million to over 30 million, right? Like, that's how good season 1 went. That was their resume of saying, hey, you thought 20 million was a lot? Look at what we accomplished. How about 30? And they sold teams at 30 million. And then they ran into this combination of factors, right? One is any new game got delayed. 2 was they had this notion that we never saw play out, but I'm going to say the economics were really hard, right? Which was this notion of the key to traditional sports, right, is that you grow up with a fanship in your DNA that was passed to you by your parents or your grandparents, right? So, like, what is your favorite sport?
Hockey. Buffalo.
So how did you become a Buffalo Sabres fan?
Yeah, I mean, growing up there, at the time I grew up, Sabres were really good. Like, late 90s and then the mid 2000s. That's what it was. That was the culture of the city. I mean, that's what I was around. Everyone was into it. Yeah.
Correct. So there was a thought, which I think is complicated, but there was a thought that says, okay, this is what we're going to do in esports, is we're going to create that same dynamic. But what that missed was the NHL, the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball have all been around for 70, 100 years, right? So there's this tradition that wasn't the way people were approaching it, to say, okay, if that's the ecosystem you want to create, well, then you need to be thinking about this in a 10 and 20 year time frame of saying, okay, we're going to start to build that so that when your kids grow up, they're Gladiator fans because you grew up in LA and you were a Gladiator fan, right? But if you think about traditional sports, right, or in soccer, football in Europe or Latin America, right? That's the game that is in your family for generations, right? You're an Arsenal fan because your great-grandfather died with Arsenal, right? So that is where I think they underestimated the investment you would have to make that work. Now, whether that would work or not, I don't know. But I think if you were going to try and see it work out, you really had to make that level of commitment. So now you're suddenly looking at 20 teams, 20 plus teams having to create a venue, having to have production resources, and having to broadcast your own matches, right? That suddenly puts this massive layer of cost on it. And that idea then ran square into COVID, right? Like the year they were going to start to have traveling matches is exactly when the pandemic broke. So that was, I'm going to say, the concept. I think they were unrealistic about the time and investment you would need to make that work. But then the whole idea just got blown up, right, by COVID.
Right.
And so in the same time, the game's losing popularity. The new game doesn't come out. And what happens? Oh, Riot comes along and says, hey, you thought League of Legends was cool. Look at our first-person shooter game. And suddenly now you have Valorant just taking everybody's attention. And now Overwatch is just kind of stuck. And so I think, like I said, there was a whole combination of factors that went into it. So with Valorant, our guys had been tracking it, and it's like, this is going to be a really cool game. And so as soon as it came out, they were like, all right, it's everything we hoped it would be. And I'm like, because I think it came out April.
Yeah, April 20.
April 20?
April 20.
April 20.
April 2020. Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. I'm like, yes, everybody's watching it. There's a pandemic. People are locked in their homes. What choice do they have? They're like, no, this is the game. It's great. Riot has been the best in the world at promoting esports. And so we dove in first. Like T1, I think, had a team before us, but not many others. Like
they might have been the only one.
We were one of the first orgs to be like, okay, like this was after we had won the Fortnite World Cup with Booga. So we'd kind of put ourselves on the map with that. So therefore, when we're calling people, it wasn't like they're saying, who are you people? It was like, oh, Sentinels, you guys ran Gladiators and you had Booga. And it was like, okay. And so we made the decision of like, we're going to be in this game first. And we're going to make an investment in this game. And we are going to invest in our belief of what Riot will accomplish in this game.
Yeah. And do you think that up until this point where we're at with franchising, Riot has accomplished that initial belief with this partnership system?
Oh, absolutely. And then the big key, which we're all about to see, which I don't think people are talking enough about, right, is Riot's about to do something that they've never done before, right, in the next 2-3 weeks here, where they're creating, right, a team-branded bundle in-game.
Yeah, I'm not... Did that get officially announced? I saw someone leak it. I don't know if it's officially.
I don't know if they've announced the
I definitely
exact
saw
date.
it get leaked, but...
Well, they've talked about that they're doing it.
Yeah,
I don't know that they've announced
just
the exact date, but it is coming soon. It is coming very soon.
That is...
Right? And so...
That is massive for... That is reason enough for why, I mean, every org was dying to get into the partnerships before partnership began.
Right.
That whole...
And so that is the key, right? Is if that ends up being... And when you look at the success Riot has had in Valorant skin bundles, even like they did a knife bundle for the lock-in tournament, they've done a champions bundle every year that the teams have participated in. When you look at the level of sales they have from those bundles, and you're like, okay, here's a team bundle coming. Okay, this has the ability to generate, this has the possibility to generate 7 figures to teams, right? And when you start to getting into, okay, you're looking at economics and your economic model and what are the levers to make this work, you suddenly go, okay, we've made this huge investment in Valorant. We've made this huge investment in our brand. And now here's the moment where that all comes together. And so, like I said, we haven't seen yet of what that looks like, of where that is on that. But like I said, when you just look at the other things Riot has done from in terms of digital content in the game, it certainly feels like this is the potential to be a very big revenue source for teams. And part of why we get back to why Riot wants teams who are good marketing partners, right? as opposed to just you put a team together that wins, but you don't help promote the league. And so that is the thing I think is really hard always for the community to get their head around, which is how did Optic not get a franchise? Right. And it's like, well, relative to Optic got awarded a franchise in League of Legends and then quickly flipped it. Right. So if you're Riot and you're like, okay, we gave you a franchise in League of Legends and then you sold it off. That is you. Now, again, this is me speculating. I did not discuss this.
Reasonable speculation, though.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you're looking at saying, okay, what did you do now to prove to us what a great partner you would be in Valorant? And so that is what we spent 2 years working on, is how do we become because also actually our first venture in esports was actually in League of Legends. That we did have a venture with P1 esports.
Yeah, I was going to say, that was when it was Phoenix 1 before it was rebranded.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
And so we'd been in League of Legends, but if you look at League of Legends, right, G2 and TSM and T1 or SKT, whatever you want to call them, right? They created these brands based upon dominating the space early that it existed for a decade, right? Like TSM, other than in the last year or two where they kind of all chaos broke out. But those brands endured even through tough times. And so that was our ambition, is how do we build a brand in Valorant that is the G2, TSM, T1 of Valorant?
Right. And so this might be too broad, because I want to get into more of the specifics of some of those initial early days, because that was, at least from my perspective, that's what I would call like lightning in a bottle. Like everything that could have gone right went right. I mean, I guess to start, if you're taking a look at that time period early on, Ignition series, when your team was in like that TSM rivalry, that was really like, that was the hot game to watch every week, whatever tournament there was going on. What was the difference like in reception at that time to the org? What, like the fan response, the numbers you were generating, to taking it back to when you had Booga and he won the World Cup? Because I was in Fortnite at the time too, and I certainly have my own perspective on the outside looking at the org, in terms of sort of like the relevance, the brand personality of it, between the major difference between those two times. But from your perspective and on the inside, what is the difference between those kind of two periods of time for the organization?
Well, when Booga won the Fortnite World Cup, right? That was our first real massive success, right? So it was an org, we'd never been through that before, right? So you're a little bit overwhelmed of like, oh, wait a second. Like, I remember, when we signed him, some of our other players who we'd already, again, we made a commitment to get into, as a company, we've really made a commitment to say, we're going to get into each new esport early. We're not going to wait and see if it works or not. If we're going to get in early, if it doesn't work, then we can always roll back out of it. But we're going to always look to be on the cutting edge of what new games are coming. So we got into Fortnite very early. And some of our other players are like, there's this kid, he's 15. Because we have a policy, we don't sign anyone until they're 16, for better or worse. They're like, when he turns 16, you got to sign him. So we sign him. And probably like a month later is when the qualifiers start. And he steamrolls through the qualifier, right? We're like, oh, wow, okay. He qualified for New York. He's going to New York, and you're like, oh, hey, maybe he'll come in top 20, top 10. He goes out there. He's a 16-year-old kid who's only played at home. He's now playing at the Arthur Ashe Arena in front of 20,000 live human beings. And he just destroys everybody on map 1. And you're like, oh, wow, okay. He's going to compete. After the second round, it's like, starts to set in. It's like, wait a second, he might win this thing. So there's no question we were playing catch up as to, okay, here's this massive thing that happened, right? We don't have a big merchandising effort. We have a small content team, right? So it's like, yeah, we are like a small new org, and it's suddenly like, oh, wait a second, right? So, but going through that, we learned a ton about what those opportunities are and what the possibilities are and what you need to be able to do to really keep that momentum going, right? And turn that into a bigger and bigger fan base. And so I'm going to say with Fortnite, we made a lot of mistakes. We learned a lot, right? But also the problem in Fortnite is Epic Games had no interest in orgs. Like the week of the tournament, they sent around, the week of the World Cup, they sent around specs for your jersey that would basically make every major org's jersey not conform, right? Based upon the size and number of logos you could have on your jersey, right? That's how they started, is here's their first LAN, and they basically send to the major orgs, hey, by the way, your jersey, yeah, you can only put 2 of those logos and they have to be this big. And so they never changed from that. Like Booga's skin for winning the World Cup, there's no Sentinels branding in that skin, right? So that where it was like, okay, we made the right choices from a person, like here's the player that we believe in. We got into a game that had grew to massive popularity, but you were within a publisher who had no interest in partnering with orgs and trying to help the orgs.
Yeah.
Or to monetize the effort.
Or
right?
frankly, at all, it just never, they were never that interested in esports. Like in general, I mean, they didn't support the player base really with it either, outside of just here's some money, here's some tournaments.
Exactly. So that's why when we were looking at Valorant, which was less than a year later, right? The Fortnite World Cup was summer 19.
Yeah.
Valorant spring of 20, right? And we're like, okay, we have the same sense of how popular the game will be, but now we know Riot Games, we know their pedigree, that they've built League of Legends into this international behemoth, right? That is sustained over time. So it's like, okay, we now know we're in business with the right partner. And this is a game that our group really believed was going to be an incredibly popular esport. And so that whole combination of factors, and then figuring out that early squad and saying from the beginning, right, we're going to be willing to pay for a roster of known players and really try and build something.
And you paid.
And so
infamously for TenZ, which is definitely something sorry to cut you off, but if there's conversation, but I did. I mean, that was early on. It still lasted. I mean, that was a massive moment in the game. Some people may not have even really been around then that are listening, but that was in the summer of spring 2020, right?
No, 21. It was the next year. Because the game just came out in 20.
Yeah. That was, so in 20, that was when TenZ was on Cloud 9, and he was clearly an incredible player. I mean, at the time, he was the best player in the game. He was playing Jet. He was doing things on Jet that no one else was doing. That is like, we look at now as kind of the standard stuff, but he was doing that before anyone even, could press the keys at the same time to do the shit he was doing. And so, infamously, you had brought on TenZ in a massive loan into buyout situation for 1.25 million, which I don't know how that stacks up against some of the other biggest acquisitions in esports history of other games, but I mean, certainly in Valorant that blows everything out.
There was a window in League of Legends where there were some crazy buyouts, but now let's just jump into the investment economics part of this whole thing, right? Because we got a lot of criticism, attention over the summer, which most of it was nonsense. But let's just talk about the environment, right? Because getting back to our ambition, right? Our ambition is to build one of the top brands in North American esports, right? But we are entering this battle in 2019 as Sentinels, right? And you're competing against TSM, Cloud9, Team Liquid, FaZe, right? NRG, you have all these existing brands who the thing that was funny about these conversations, because FaZe financial information is all public, right? FaZe built an amazing brand in esports. And they forgot one thing, though, along the way, was because they were investing in the way people invested when the internet first became a public vehicle of don't worry about profit, grow as big as you can get as fast as you can, right? So they built this amazing footprint and generated a lot of revenue, but didn't build a cost model that was sustainable, right? So they had a business model, right, where even once you got to 40, 50 million in revenue, whatever their numbers are, it is public, where they were losing an equal amount. And so they had invested hundreds of millions of dollars in their brand, right? And again, none of this is judgmental other than that element of saying, okay, but now you need to figure out a business model of how are we monetizing this so that there's a margin in it, right? But like, I found it only because our information was public, but there is other information that's public in terms of what other orgs have raised and the capital they've invested, right? That 100 Thieves has raised over $100 million. So when people look at what we lost last year or how much we've invested as a group of investors, right? It's like, okay, we've invested $30 million to get ourselves to where, and now you can argue with me, but I'm going to say it's not debatable, where we have the #1 brand in Valorant.
I mean, that's not debatable. I mean, that's just not. But
so we've built a company that now has the #1 brand in the #1 game in North America, right? So competing against TSM at their peak, right? Because getting back to where you said that early rivalry between us and TSM, right? We're now Sentinels and TSM are looked at as equals. Where 2 years ago in League of Legends, right, we were basically the nobody little expansion team.
Even in Fortnite. I mean, despite having great players, TSM were the ones with like Hamlins and Daquan and Myth and so even then.
So we now had gotten ourselves to a place where we're on the same footing with these orgs that have been around a decade, right? And we'd been around a couple of years. So there's that moment where we're like, and the TenZ acquisition is part of that, of saying, okay, we won the Fortnite World Cup. We now won Masters Reykjavik. You call it Masters 1. I call it Masters 2.
That's fine. Just Reykjavik keeps it simple in my brain.
We won Masters Reykjavik. And at that point, it's like, okay, this is our moment now. We now have the infrastructure. We now have the staff that we can now take advantage of this opportunity. And so we're going to make this investment in our brand to say, okay, TenZ is the most popular player competing in the game. And he was just the MVP of our international tournament. And then if you stop and say, okay, in the history of esports, name 5 bigger global successes than us going to Reykjavik and not dropping a map and beating Fnatic twice, right? Like everyone always talks about the Cloud9 Boston Major, right? And Counter-Strike, right? That is the moment of esports success for North America people talk about. But other than that, what would you put in the same category as of us just going into Iceland and just, because my biggest fear was, right, we were going to go into the first international competition and find out, oh, North America is not that good at Valorant either, and we've just been beating North American teams. Like, I said to like my key staff, I'm like, if we win a map, I'm taking you all to dinner. If we win one map, because I'm like, again,
people definitely did think, and by people, I mean, listen, we definitely were on the EU being the best region in early Valorant train. We were, I remember being, I mean, especially surprised because version 1 went and they like beat Liquid right away. I was like, what the fuck? but yeah, that was definitely surprising how good North America was just in general, how well they did at that. Yeah, that was not expected.
I will say it is hard. Like when I go back to watch, people always laugh because I say the single esports match I've watched the most in this window of time, no one would ever guess. Like I could give you 10 guesses, you would never get it. because it's super obscure, but the way everyone responded to it was like David taking out Goliath, which was in the summer of 2016, we acquired what was Team Impulse, which was basically just a shell of a League of Legends team. And Eric Ma basically came to me. It was like 2 weeks before I get introduced to him. And he's like, okay, I've lined up the acquisition of Team Impulse. And I'm like, okay, can you put a roster together that won't get relegated? And he's like, I'll see you tomorrow. And he comes back with a business plan and a roster. And we lose maybe our first 10 matches because there was a jungler he'd found that needed to get a visa, and it took that long to get them here. And so when we're playing TSM, I think we're 2-13 and they're 15-0. And we give TSM their first loss of the year, and everybody's going nuts. The crowd's going nuts. The caster's going nuts. It is just what in the world? How are they losing to these kids? But at Reykjavik, there are no fans. And certainly by map 2, the casters are kind of frustrated of like, no, we want this to be competitive. And they're kind of overtly rooting for Fnatic. So when you go back and watch it, there's no crowd reaction. And the casters are all rooting for Fnatic because it's like, wait, we all pick Fnatic to win. And we don't want this to be boring. And we don't want it to be a 3-0. So it's not that satisfying to watch. But we went there and I'm like, are we going to have the same thing that always happens? North America goes to international event and just gets crushed. And we steamrolled that event. So it's like, okay, we now have the infrastructure to really capitalize on this. And so that's when we made the decision of like, okay, we're now going to substantially increase our investment in content. We're going to acquire TenZ. And so that's when our investment started, was summer of 21, where these other people had been investing for a decade. And when you add it all up, you're like, oh, wait, okay, 100 Thieves, Cloud9 over their time, they've raised $100-ish million, right? So it was just so funny to me of people reacting to, wow, they've spent $30 million. Like, okay, FaZe has spent hundreds of millions of dollars because these are the orgs that we're competing with. So it's like, all right, to build a brand that is up to that level, that's the kind of investment we need to make. So everyone got a snapshot into what was probably the crossover for us of, we've now made this big investment, but a lot of the revenue we expect to come out of that investment is going to be in 24 and 25.
Sure. Do you think that TenZ acquisition had serious, long-standing implications on the contract buyout market in Valorant? Because there was certainly, post that point, there's been a lot of situations that have come up where it's like, there's a talented tier 2 player on a tier 2 organization and they want like fucking how much for this guy that he's in jail and can't leave and go to a better team? But do you think that's the case?
Well, I think there were a couple things that all happened at the same time, right? Which is, there's all this conversation now about esports winter. It's more about there was a bubble in esports, which is normally what happens. Whenever you have a new business that is growing rapidly, that appeals to younger people, right? Investors, private equity just kind of say, okay, here's some cash, grow your business, and then we'll figure out the business model, right? Esports had a second wave of that, which was, all these crypto exchanges came in and were like, you're talking to exactly our customer base, right? So infamously, the FTX TSM partnership, right? So another massive wave of money came into the space, which we didn't capitalize on because we were just kind of just outside of that in terms of when we were building to some level of fame. So I think when you take into account how easy it was for people to raise capital, the infusion of sponsorship dollars from crypto related entities, and then yes, there was a benchmark set. But again, I think the one thing people lose track of along the way is, okay, it's a combination with him, right? It's not that he was the best player at the tournament. He's also the most popular player competing in this game, right? So you're investing in someone who has amazing talent, but he also has amazing reach and amazing fan base. So that's where people start to lose track of when agents are asking or orgs are asking for crazy buyouts, right? It's like, well, wait a second. How do you help me generate more revenue if you're good at the game, but you don't have any brand and you don't have any fan base? And then partnership was coming, right? So then that led to crazy asks in terms of everyone scrambling, thinking that success and performance was going to be high on the resume list. But if you actually went back, and we were in it, if you went back and looked at League of Legends franchising, there was actually the exact same dynamic took place in an org during the exact franchising process who was at Worlds when Riot didn't give them a partnership in League of Legends, and it was Immortals, right? And so Immortals was literally at Worlds when they were told, yeah, you're not getting a franchise. So Riot had already shown, hey, just competing and winning isn't what we're looking for. We're looking for partners. We're looking for people who actually help promote the game. And so that's why that wasn't that big a surprise. But when you layer that element in of this game is crazy popular in North America, we're actually good at it internationally, and Riot's building this league, so therefore there was this bubble also in transfer pricing that you saw at the culmination of partnerships, right? Of the last great wave of six-figure buyouts was all the players that got transferred at the start of the teams that got partnerships.
Right. What do you see is the light at the end of the tunnel, or the way out of this esports winter that we're in right now? What is going to be what are things going to look like when we're out of this situation?
Well, I think when you just look at any super fast growth industry that has a bubble and then it pops, right? And then, right, because people usually are focused on one thing, right? You're either focused on growth at all costs, or you're focused on profitability, right? So now the pendulum has just swung from, oh, we don't care if we're profitable, we just want to grow fast, right? And FaZe being the poster child of that. And now you have this change. And I will say the person who articulated it best publicly was Nadeshot, and his key people had a podcast sometime last summer where he basically said, our Counter-Strike team, our Call of Duty team, their Call of Duty team won the world championship, but lost $2.5 million, right? So they are basically giving all their esports teams a budget and says, this is your direct revenue, that's your budget, right? So like with their Valorant team, it's like, okay, this is what money we know we're getting from Riot, that's your budget, right? Cloud9's done a similar thing. So therefore there's been a complete reset in salaries that are now based upon, oh, here's the revenue we get paid on a Valorant team. Okay, that's the pool of which we're going to pay salaries. So there's no question that the player pool, right, we're the biggest beneficiaries of the bubble, right? Because people are just like, I don't care if I can monetize this. I need to grow. And so I think now you're already seeing the rationalization of spending to be like, okay, I now have a sense of my economics, so this is how I'm going to put my salaries together, right? So you've got a reset that is taking place, and I think over the next year it'll probably get to that place. And then the other thing we've seen is the way sponsors, where before it was because the things that kind of hit at the same time, right, was a economic slowdown globally, right? Summer of 22, and interest rates that had been zero for close to a decade suddenly being 4 or 5% again. So suddenly when interest rates are high, investors suddenly change from, well, I don't care when I get my money back, I just care how much I get back, to, oh, wait a second, when am I going to get this money back? And so that also affects people and saying, okay, we got to make this work. And then because of the economic slowdown, sponsors started taking a much tougher eye to saying, am I getting what I wanted out of these sponsorship deals? So we've now been rebuilding that and making deals with people where the guarantees are lower, but we have performance incentives, right? So like our deal with Starforge, we have a guarantee that's a lot lower where guarantees were 2-3 years ago, but we get a royalty based on selling the Sentinels branded PC, right? We announced, and at this point, I think half the people can't tell between the meme and the product, right? We announced a new energy drink sponsorship with Advanced.gg, who had a great product, who Zelsis and Zekin were drinking in the office. And then someone introduced us to them and like, okay, here's a product our players really like. So then we worked out a deal to launch a Sentinels branded flavor. And they sent us 3 different flavors that they were working on. TenZ actually conducted like a blind taste test in the office, and we picked the raspberry lemonade flavor. And then it was like, okay, what should a Sentinels energy drink be named? And then it was like, okay, this is the phrase we're most associated with, usually in a negative way. But we're hoping that this year we turn that around and we're like, okay, you can now actually drink Sentinels Hopium. And so we launched that partnership. And again, a much lower guarantee, but now having that interest in the sales, but partnering with someone who, fortunately, our players were like, oh, this product is great. And they were already walking around the office drinking it all the time. And then the players picked which flavor that was the one we were going to go with. So those are the type of deals now that we're doing. So therefore the bar is higher versus, like I said, 2-3 years ago, where someone would make a multi-million-dollar 2-year deal where the deliverables weren't that specific versus, okay, we now need to know the success of our marketing partnership, that you're helping drive actual direct awareness and direct sales of our product.
Right. What else do you think is a part of the path to profitability for organizations moving forward? Because there's recently, and due to, I think, what you're saying, there's been different efforts and ideas as to how to actually make money. You guys have like the SEN Society. It's kind of like a Patreon, but it's straight to you guys, where you have additional content, that kind of thing, if people subscribe. 100 Thieves are making a game and doing different things. Like, what's your opinion on efforts like that?
Yeah, I think it's all about how do you give the fan the ability to connect with your brand, right? So we launched SEN Society last year, probably would have been better with a better performance, but we started to learn a lot about it. We're actually using the interface that it was actually T1 in Korea had used this to build their fan club. And then using that fan club to give our fans unique experiences, our first opportunity at things, right? So whenever we have a new merchandise drop, they get first opportunity. When we do watch parties at the office, they get the first, and sometimes we've done it exclusively for our fan club members. So doing things that they can be a bigger part of the Sentinels family, and then making a really big push, and this I'll say, like stealing a page from 100 Thieves, of if you put the right design effort into creating cool merchandise, right? That fans love owning that piece of your brand. So we brought our merchandise efforts in-house, and are now going to be rolling out new merchandise lines more frequently. But we've already seen like the benefit of this. So like we had a windbreaker that fans have that we had launched in Champions 21.
Yeah,
right?
I can see it in my mind's eye.
And
Yes.
So we had just got like it worked out. We're going to manufacture it in China, and we were getting ready to have it for the ready for the kickoff event. That's when we were going to launch it. But as we were going to Korea, I'm like, okay, under the very small chance we win, let's be ready to launch it the next day. And we'll do pre-orders to basically say, hey, we're back. And here's the jacket you all wanted. We won something. Celebrate. Get your champions jacket. And so Riley Jameson, who's our key marketing person, he's there. And suddenly we win, and he's scrambling around trying to get everybody into the jacket. So if you actually see the shot from the Africa event on the stage, our players are all wearing this jacket. Right. And we put it on sale, and sold out most. There's like probably like 10 left at this point. And so that ability to move quickly, where we're in control of it, of basically saying, oh, okay, here we go. Here's a moment that fans are going to want to connect to. And so that's a big part of what we'll be doing. And then obviously pushing and promoting the team capsule, right? That is one that you don't know what the upside is, right? We have a sense of it because Halo, which we're part of, when they launched Halo Infinite and the partnership program there, they did have team skins as part of that. And so you did see substantial rewards from Halo, and certainly Valorant has got a much bigger player base. So when you look at that and some of the learnings from that of saying, okay, how do we make sure we maximize this? So we will have like some crossover where we're going to do a merchandise drop that connects into our team capsule. So really trying to maximize the team capsule, looking for more opportunities to do more with merchandise, and then being much more flexible in terms of how we engage with sponsors. And then I think you're seeing in general in the space a rationalization of player cost, right? And so some of those things, right, are still coming through the system. But I think when you get to the end of 24, beginning of 25, then I think you have the shakeout that usually comes, right? Because there are thousands of esports orgs globally. No business can sustain thousands of competitors, right? So I think you'll have that natural consolidation to where you should have then the most talented orgs with the best marketing and the best eye for talent sustain, and then you have a much more interesting space.
What are the major misconceptions and common misconceptions that are extremely frustrating to witness that people espouse about the esports organization business?
Well, it is funny, right? Because it is similar to traditional sports in one very specific way, right? Where your fans want you to field a championship level team, right? That's what everybody wants. But that's why I found it so amusing in the summer when people saw our financials, when people are giving us our time. I'm like, why would anyone be unhappy, right? That my key partners and I have decided we believe in this space. We want to invest in this space. We want to have championship level teams. And then people are like horrified of like, you're losing money. And then you go 2 months later, and now you're watching the exact reverse of that, where everybody's mocking evil geniuses, right? Of saying, oh, you held your players in jail, you forced them to take pay cuts. And I'm like, which is it? You got to pick one, right? You either should be praising us to say, I love this ownership group. They want to create great content and they want to have winning teams for me. So why would I be anything but happy? Or saying, oh, of course, there needs to be a rationalization in what costs are, because we've seen FaZe's economics and we've seen Sentinels economics, right? Those are the only two that are public that I'm aware of. To say, okay, we've seen it, so we have a sense of it's too expensive, so it makes sense that they're trying to rationalize the cost structure. So it is that funny dynamic of, so the handful of orgs have been around long enough that have a sponsor profile big enough to make a profit. Everyone else, we're unhappy with you. So I think in terms of what we've accomplished and how much we've grown, right? Like in terms of our Twitter followers, in terms of our YouTube subscribers, right? That when you look at where we were 2 years ago to where we are now, right? We've grown more than anyone else in the space during that window. And so that's what I find a little bit frustrating is everyone kind of cherry picks the negative to obsess over, as opposed to saying, I'm an esports fan. I'm happy people investing in esports. Like, I don't ever understand how anyone has a different worldview than that.
So there was something in there, though, that I think encapsulates so much about the Sentinels organization and why it captures the interest of people, is that the delicate balance of creating great content for people and also winning, which is why in my eyes, the org took off immediately. It was the lightning in a bottle. You had everything going at the same time. The team was winning. They had big content creators, and the players had personality in and out of game that then transferred over to just the Sentinels personality, the trash talking, the bantering, all that type stuff. There's a direct correlation, at least in my brain. I don't know if you agree to the first time dapr shot a body on the ground to Sentinels in 2024, making a joke about the group of death having 100 Thieves in it. Like I can, do you agree that there's kind of a correlation to draw between those two?
Absolutely. And I think the key is, right, that attitude of, and it drives other orgs fans crazy, right, is we have attitude whether we're winning or losing, right? Like people like Loud posted back like our resume from last year. And they're like, how are you part of the group of death? You guys lost 6 out of 8 matches in this window. So the key is, and this is the thing that's hardest at times for people to get their head around. We think this is fun. We think we have people playing and watching video games, right? We don't take it seriously. We want to win because we're competitors, but we also want to entertain people because at the end of the day, we think this is entertainment. And so coming from my background, that's obviously where I go to, which is we want to entertain fans and engage fans. And yeah. I'm okay with people trolling me.
I'm trying to find a moment here to pivot because I really want to talk about your background as well, but there's about 9,000 interesting things coming up that it's like, Jesus Christ, I can't, I'm trying to keep up here. Because, okay, I'll ask it now, and then I do want to get into that history because I do think that what you just said was very relevant, the history of the entertainment industry and the influence that that's had on a lot of the decisions that have been made. And there is no moment in the Sentinels history that perfectly illustrates the balance of competition, content, attention, entertainment. And I think you know where I'm going with this. It is Shroud. That was a historic moment. First of all, I guess to set the scene of what was happening at the time, you had won Masters Reykjavik, massive moment, first international LAN. Slow decline after that. The next Berlin made the playoffs at Champions, knocked out at the group stage,
but qualified for every international event in 21.
Still qualifying, yes. But you also at that point, you establish a benchmark of they blew everyone out of the water, and so people are just expecting to watch that over and over, and things slowly are slipping, and then as the next year comes around, there was the which I don't want to spend a ton of time on, though. There was like the period of time where Raucus was in, Raucus was out. There wasn't a coach for the team. It's like, what the hell is going on? It seems like Shaz is doing everything. Really quick, could you just touch on that? What was going on with the coaching situation? Why someone wasn't brought in more aggressively?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake we made, and I am a parent, so I should be smarter about this than other people, because most people in esports aren't parents, is our players had massive success and it was like we spoiled them, right? Because it was like we all won the lottery together, right? And so they had earned a level of partnership that it sometimes is very complicated, right? So therefore, it wasn't like we could say to them, oh, we're hiring you a coach, right? Because they had done all that in 21 without a coach, right? Because that was their play style and that was the way it was working. And I think at that point, Shaz was so smart about the game because he'd been playing it from inception, right? There weren't a lot of other people who he would believe could be smarter about the game than him. So he definitely had earned that level of respect. So it wasn't like we could force a coach on him. So then it was about saying, okay, how are the players all agreeing on a coach? Now, whenever the players are picking a coach for themselves, right, that's just a complicated. So it was never for lack of, like, we had always been saying to them, let's hire an analyst, let's hire a coach. But that sense of, well, we're going to spend so much time training them. How are they going to help us? Right. So that was the weird dynamic of having built a team so skilled so fast in a brand new game, right? There wasn't a lot of infrastructure available from a coach analyst perspective, right? So that was at 20 and 21. So then it was like, okay, now we start to struggle. What do we need to do? Now, I'm going to say there was a level of, as you said, right? There's a pivot that happens of, I now have a profile and a personality, and there is this other revenue stream available to me because I'm now a big personality and our org's a personality. So I can make a ton of money streaming, and I've won a lot of things, right? So that's a conflict you run into of that balance between streaming and competing, right? And so that dynamic then of saying, okay, how do we change this? Right. And so for better or worse, and this is the one thing I do regret, is once we went through partnership and it's like, okay, 2022 was a disaster and you can't go backwards in time, and the players had a sense of their entitlement. It's like, okay, we just have to start over. Right. So that's when we brought in Syyko and basically gave him free reign to say, you put your roster together. Right. And so at some point, Shaz commented on a meme we had, and I finally just kind of lost it because I was like very frustrated of how the prior 3 months had gone. But certainly in terms of what Shaz did for the organization, it was amazing. And he put in an incredible amount of work. So I feel bad that the biggest public statement I made about Shaz was me criticizing him for where he was at the very end versus the amount of great work he put in that helped build us to where we were. And then the other thing, and I saw dapr get interviewed about this after they won, I think, the Tarek Ludwig event. And this was probably the hardest moment for me as a owner CEO in this space, right? Is when the coaching staff came and said, we want to bring in Sasi and Pankata. We had one open spot, and that meant dapr wasn't going to have a spot. And making that call to him was one of the worst calls I've made in my professional career because he had been committed to winning. He'd worked his butt off. He was trying to help put the roster together. And so that was one of those moments of like, well, okay, we've said to Syyko, we don't like the way last year we went. We want you to build this roster. And that it comes back to, all right, well, that was a crazy opportunity to get Sasi and Pankata. That means there's no spot for dapr. So that really sucked. And I saw him talk about it the other day, and I felt the same way. Like, he felt very betrayed and let down, and he should have, because that is what ultimately happened. Then hopefully, like I said, I'm rooting for them. I hope Oxygen wins the Ascension, because he deserves it.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I mean, you spent a lot of time in these sort of major company positions, and it was something I was going to kind of ask, but I suppose you sort of answered the question, which is, you know, is it still tough to have to make these decisions regarding people's future, their career, like the weight of kind of bearing that responsibility in your hands? How much does that weigh on you?
Yeah, whenever you're making a decision that could negatively impact someone's future, that's always tough. It doesn't get easier. Right. And like I said, with dapr in particular, because we'd had such a tough season, right? There was no that's where you're like, okay, now, fortunately, G2 came in and put half the band back together. And so fortunately, Shaz and dapr then had a new home. And so that kind of worked out. But in the meantime, yeah, that was really, yeah, that was one of the tougher things to deal with because we had just given someone that authority. So it's a little hard. You hire somebody and a week later, like, well, you have authority except this one spot on the roster. Right. So, but yeah, it doesn't get easier.
Right. To a little bit circle it back on the thing that got this started, though, was just wanted to get the background info on the time period where you had Shroud, because that was just a wild moment where content and competition comes to a head, where it's just, you know, you just, it was must watch TV basically. who even suggested that? How does that conversation
Now,
even
the one thing I want to go in reverse order here for a second.
Okay.
Right? No, because the two teams who ended up in the final of the LCQ were the Guard and 100 Thieves.
Yeah.
Okay? That's who ended up in the final of the LCQ. Against the Guard, we went to map 3, had match point, and lost in overtime. Right? And against 100 Thieves, we lost in 3. And then I think 100 Thieves must have beat the Guard in the finals.
Yeah.
Right? So, and we beat, I think it was version 1 in between. Like we lost to the Guard, I think we beat version 1, and then we lost to 100 Thieves. I think that's what happened in the LCQ. Right? But lost in overtime in map 3 against the Guard, beat version 1 and 2, and lost in 3 to 100 Thieves. So, relative to the way our 2022 had gone, that was actually as good of a showing as we'd had. Okay. So I just want to start at the end. This is like a movie where you start at the end and then you go back and say, how did we get here? Wait, how is Shroud playing? So I was on the phone trying to sign Tarek. And Tarek's reps also represent Shaz. And so this was like our first call about Tarek. And I said, just kind of, we were talking about the team, and I go, wait a second. I go, here's the one question I have for you. Because we couldn't find a player that everyone agreed on, right? And I'm like, why are there no like good smokes players that anyone like gets along with and wants to play with? And then he goes, hey, I'm a smokes player. I go, I can get you a tryout. And he goes, well, no. He goes, but you know who plays smokes? He goes, Mike plays smokes, Shroud. And I'm like, and we all laugh. And then the other agent on the call is kind of like, okay, like back to Tarek. So we talk about Tarek. So then the next night at like midnight, I get a message back and says, hey, if you guys are actually interested and the team wants to play with him, Shroud's down to come join you guys for the LCQ. So I like message my like competitive group, and we're all kind of like, is he trolling us? And then we finally come to the agreement that if he's prepared to go to boot camp, because we're going to boot camp in I think it was Dallas. Yeah, because we went to the complexity. If he's willing to go to Dallas and boot camp, this is interesting enough. And for better or worse, we knew that Shroud had played a ton of Valorant, and he was the Tarek of season 1, right? Like 2021, Shroud was that person. So he'd already watched a ton of Sentinels matches and been part of it. So it was like, okay, he has a sense of our playstyle. And he is someone who has achieved incredible success in esports. So it's not like we're pulling out someone who's just a content creator. He's someone who's won championships as a competitor. So it was like, okay, if he's down to put the work in, then this is so crazy, it'll be fun, if nothing else. Because our year has been a disaster at this point, right? We just went 0-5 in the summer split and made the LCQ as the 10th team by like 1 point. Right? Because there was a whole formula, and we came down to like this last order of things we had to have happen to make the LCQ, and they all somehow happened. So we got in barely, right? So it wasn't like there was any sense of like, oh yeah, we're about to win this. It was like, you know what? Let's do something crazy. It'll also change the whole team dynamic, right? Because when you've now start to have that much failure after having that much success, right? Things of course start to get more toxic, right? Things become less fun. And as I said, I think TenZ really excels when the game is fun. And the game was not fun in the middle of 2022. So it was like, oh, he knows Shroud. And it was like, he was like, oh, this would be amazing, right? So it was just one of those crazy ideas where the agent just happened to be having dinner with him the next night. He's like, hey, I got a crazy idea. Would you be down for this? And when he first throws it out at dinner, it's kind of like, you're crazy. And by the end of dinner, it's like percolating in Shroud's head. Toward the end of the dinner, he's like, you know what? That could be fun. So we worked it out like overnight because the deal wasn't very complicated. And we sent a content team to his house. We got like a jersey rushed where I basically said to our partner at the time, I'm like, hey, we have a chance to do a content shoot with Shroud. If I can get a jersey by Thursday and we'll come pick it up. Right. So and then to shoot the content where the announcement is Shroud literally playing the announcement video to where everyone's just like, what the hell is happening here? Is this real? Are they trolling us? So it was a ton of fun. The matches in the LCQ had more people watching than like the finals of the LCS. And like I said, we came really close to winning it. Like we did come really close to winning that event. Like, here's what I'm going to say. We were closer to winning the LCQ that year than we were this year with our actual roster.
That is hilarious. That is hilariously true. But okay, so if you okay, so kind of to summarize it though, it was a 100% on fun, intrigue, viewership, content, all of that, and then he was really good in CS. He does play the game. What the hell, it might work, but at least there's one guarantee that this is going to be an amazing moment, basically.
And it's only going to be an amazing moment if he doesn't come out and we get rolled, right? If we get rolled, then it's just,
then
right?
It's just
then
sad.
it's just embarrassing.
Then it's sad.
Right? So you had to have the belief, and part of it was him having the belief, right? That he believed he could compete, because if we came out and lost 13-2, 13-3, right? We would just be the laughing stocks, right?
Yeah.
So we did make the assessment, and I think it was proved out. There was one infamous bomb issue, planting issue that happened. But other than that, right, we actually came really close to winning that and qualifying for champ. So in the history of Sentinels, yes, it is one of those infamous ones that when we're not doing well kind of brands us as the meme org of we prioritized content over competition, right? But that was more of there isn't another path here that's going to result in something positive. So let's turn it into something positive and fun and entertaining.
Gotcha. And as you were saying, that's the tie-in to your previous work at Paramount, et cetera. And I was trying to listen, there was at some point here, because I think the background in pivoting into esports as your major thing is very interesting.
Yeah, and I'll just say quickly, because I spent time at Paramount, I spent time at Disney. I actually worked with the late Steve Jobs when we were doing the Pixar deal when I was at Disney. But living through some amazing brands, right? The birth of Pixar at Disney, and then the like revolution of Marvel Studios launching when I was at Paramount. And so that, I think, is the thing I most took with it as I came to esports, is saying you have to do something unique and stay with it, right? And so that is where, to a fault, right, we always are going for the meme. We are always pushing people's buttons, whether we're winning or losing. And therefore, you can count on that. Now, like I said, when we're losing, other teams' fans find it like outrageous. Like, how can you still have this attitude? Look at you where you are in the standings. And then, like, when the crowdfund was happening and people saw the financials, so much so that Boaster is like chiming in, right? And when we're making fun of Fnatic, he's chiming in and calling us the broke org, right? So, but that is what we love, right? We love the banter, we love the back and forth, and some people don't have the same sense of humor about it we have, so occasionally we do tweak people. And we are happy for people to hit us while we're down. We never think there's a shot not worth taking. So like when 100 Thieves bombed out of the Tarek Ludwig Invitational, we did have to comment on it because that's our role in the space.
I guess one thing I was just curious about was just taking it way back, because I had read a quote that you'd given to a reporter for an award that you received in 2012 for the Fulfillment Fund. And you had said that neither of your parents had graduated from college, but they were committed to sending you. The fund gives poor students the opportunity my parents gave me. And I thought that was interesting because it kind of began to maybe paint a picture of, you know, where you came from and where you're at now. So sort of just asking that question of, you know, what were the beginnings like, where you came from, and then, you know, we can kind of wrap by talking about where Sentinels are going to go.
Yeah, I grew up where like I had a job from when I was 14, right? And I was always working. Went to Pepperdine, played water polo there. And I had a dream. Here's the funny part of all this. My dream growing up was to be a baseball announcer. Like I wanted to be Vin Scully, right? That was my dream. But I'm like, this is way too complicated. I need to get a real job, right? So I went into accounting. I got a real job. And then fortunately, I had an opportunity to go to Disney when Disney was just kind of turning the page from when they'd been asleep for a decade to where they were really, Michael Eisner came in and was really looking to re-energize that brand.
And that was the mid 80s?
That was the late 80s, early 90s.
Okay.
Right? And so that's when I jumped in there and was a place where suddenly they were building that brand again. So I was part of that dynamic. And then ended up at Paramount, where suddenly at this point, now I've got a job that I'm not qualified for. Suddenly I'm in rooms with Marty Scorsese and giving him notes on Wolf of Wall Street being too long, right? But having like worked my way from absolutely nothing to do with the creative or marketing side of the business to where that was the job I had at Paramount, and was part of launching, like I said, some of these franchises and building some of these brands. And that's the key thing I brought with me to esports is I do have a complete love of sports. I am way too interested in sports. I follow almost every sport. I follow the English Premier League. And so bringing that passion to esports, but then also being in a space that's brand new. And so trying to help figure out how do we make this into a profitable venture? That is certainly our ambition. So that is kind of where I came from and what I'm hoping to do in this chapter.
Yeah. And then just looking towards the future, where do you kind of see Sentinels and yourself, even just, you know, within a few years and even a decade from now?
Well, I think the key of what we've been doing and since Fortnite, really, because we got into Fortnite, we got into Apex, we got into Halo Infinite, we got into Valorant, is constantly wanting to be on the front end of getting into new games and trying to build and establish our brand in those games. And so always on the lookout for saying either where's the next superstar content creator or where's the next big esport. And so hopefully through digital content, through merchandise, through other avenues to monetize the brand, that we will have an organization that is worth what these, or well, it's unclear that people will get back to where other orgs raised money at 3 years ago, right? I mean, it is the really complicated. The good news about us is because we had raised all the money internally, right? Our valuation, right, was 20 million, 30 million. Other people had raised money at 200 million, 300 million. Unclear if and when they get back to that level. But we do think we're on a path with the strength of our brand that we could build an organization that could be worth over 100 million 3-5 years from now. And that's our ambition.
Gotcha.
That's what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Well, all right, listen, the weather got us a little bit delayed at the beginning. I have about 500 more things I wanted to ask you. So maybe I can save that for another day. Maybe at the beginning of Sentinels 2025, we can
or if
run
we
it back and see what's going on then.
Or if we actually win a tournament, we can regroup.
Or that. But I appreciate you doing this. It was a very fun time. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
We are good to go after extending that for hours.